What up, guys? I will be finishing up the rest of the list for the top 20 death metal bands. I've skipped all the bullshit. I'm really getting tired of just putting this on hold, so I'm going to do it now. I'm just going to do the top 5, though. Make this quick, simple. But I'm going to tell you some of the other ones. Number 6, we had Atheist. Number 7 was Pestilence. Cannibal Corpse was at number 8. I just felt that was a reasonable position. Dark Tranquillity was at number 9. Immolation was at number 10. So that's 5 of those right there. So let's get to the 5, shall we? I'm running out of Diet Mountain Dew. So at number 5 we had Napalm Death. Fantastic band. I love Napalm Death to death. Interesting. So what does Napalm Death offer up? Napalm Death offers up, they are considered the first grindcore band, and have kind of been the fathers of the blast beat, which is basically almost a religious thing in death metal to have a blast beat. So they also featured like the first really low growls, some of that nature with their first vocalist, and they brought in Barney on Harmony Corruptions. The band's been very consistent throughout their career, and they've produced some truly classic extreme metal albums like Harmony Corruption, Scum, even I would say the B-Sides album, I think it is Fear, Emptiness, and Despair, is very good. Albums to check out: Smear Campaign, Scum, and their newest album, Utilitarian. There'll be a review up tomorrow. Fucking love Mountain Dew. So at number 4 we have Deicide. I love Deicide. Probably one of my favorites. Deicide offers up a very strong, very brutal. It's in a way the true origin of death metal. They're very influential on the grindcore and the death metal scene as a whole. I would classify them as brutal, technical death metal with sophisticated sense of songwriting and some interesting little dark melodies that are spread throughout their albums. Band's been very consistent with minor changes, like Napalm Death have had some minor changes, not in the lineup, but in the sound that is barely noticeable, but still adds a fresh element that gives it some interesting to a bit more distinctive than getting it mixed up with, say, like a Cannibal Corpse release. Very consistent band. The only album I didn't like was the Breeding Spawn because of production-wise, there were some things, but very good band. Cheers to those guys. Our own little slice of technical death metal heaven. Albums to check out are Souls to Deny and Pierce from Within. Number 3 we have a very underrated band, Cynic. I love Cynic. Fantastic band, man. Cynic you could basically say they're not death metal anymore, but back then they were basically a hybrid of, they were kind of like the first progressive death metal band, I would say. Very influential on the Degent and some of the more extreme kind of experimental bands like Opeth, and even I felt like there's a little influence on Atheist, because they are, I think, a little bit older than Atheist, and even some of the more recent Morbid Angel stuff. No, not recent, but some of the older Morbid Angel stuff where there's a bit more technicality. They differed themselves a lot. First of all, they were very heavy on the melody, kind of like what Death did, but instead of Death, they kind of did it a little bit differently. They used vocoder for the clean vocals, which was almost like kind of a dirty word in the death metal era scene, especially in the 90s. This really set them apart. The clean vocals under these short body kind of structures, this very complex arrangements and riffs that really didn't repeat itself in the lyrics, whereas where Deicide was kind of doing semi-satanic, anti-Christian stuff, Cannibal Corpse was doing the whole gore thing with Butchered at Birth and stuff like that. They were kind of, I would almost say they were similar to like Death's lyrics, how they were sort of spiritual in the human meaning and introspective. Very great band. I thank God they've made a comeback. Traced Air is fantastic, and the new EP that came out with Carbon-Based Anatomy is a very solid piece of work. The band's starting to get more like a progressive band, but I'm completely fine with this change because they've been like this since 1993. Number 2, here we go, boys. We have Obituary, another one of the oldest death metal bands to be around. They came out around the same time as Death. They're even kind of compared to Death a little bit, just vocal-wise though. The way they write their songs are completely different from one another. So what does Obituary offer? Obituary is another one of the Florida bands. It was a huge scene. The scene was spawned down there, And what is Obituary out for, well, than the other bands? Well, first of all, they can be classified as like one of the more groove-laden bands, like, you know, 6 Feet Under and stuff like that, or even The Haunted. I consider them like Death Thrash. Their older stuff, like Mark Arco. But back to Obituary. Obituary is another one of my favorite death metal bands. They're kind of a good band if you want to get into death metal because they're not overly brutal. Like, it's not like Deicide or Napalm Death. It's very it's driven by a lot of groove. Lyrically, you could compare them to Cannibal Corpse. I mean, their lyrics are kind of are in the same area, except for some of their newer stuff's a little bit more interesting with lyrical ideas. The band released some truly like classic death metal releases like Cause of Death, Slowly We Rot, and I'll even call Manipulative Waste a good album. The grooves in there are very infectious, and you'll be nodding your head or headbanging in this case. Their singer has a more distinctive vocal style, so it's easier to interpret what he's saying. Strong records, these are definitely some classics, and they're still putting out pretty decent records today and traveling. I hope to see them one day. Cheers to the number one. Shouldn't be a shocker, but whatever. Death. Yeah. Big shocker. Surprise. If I'd said Jay-Z, would you be mad? Probably. But yeah, I love Death. Now, everybody knows Death is the father, Chuck Schuldiner. Oh my god, how can I not say the fucking names today? But Chuck, very inspirational in the death metal scene. Very inspirational. They basically took what Slayer was kind of doing, but amplified it by 1,000. Less melody, less rhythms, just these brutal riffs in the beginning. But they changed around Spiritual Healing, where the lyrics started to change up. Originally, they were more like these very unmelodized, very tremolo-picked, very fast song classics like Zombie Ritual and Pull the Plug, and then lyrics were mostly like gore-based. Then around Spiritual Healing, they started to get more technical with the work. The lyrics started to become more political, and they started to write some more memorable riffs, if you say. But it wasn't with Spiritual Healing, everything changed. It was on Human. Added amounts of melody, and this does feature the guitarist and rhythm guitarist from Cynic. They worked on this album. And it was Human, a masterpiece of Death's work, mainly considered their best. On this album, they started using much more melody on tracks like Lack of Comprehension, much more complicated riffing, and lyrics started, instead of where the politicalness was coming from, the gore bass before, they were becoming more of a spiritual, kind of introspective, like the lyrics to Secret Faces. That's a very good song. The lyrics kind of explain what I'm talking about. Chuck's vocals started to get higher around this, and they would go up as each album. You had Individual Thought Patterns, which was a pretty decent album. It's not one of my favorites, though. My favorite is Symbolic, their 95 album. This album came with some of the clean tones they were using back on Human and Individual Thought Patterns. Much added melody, great song structures, some jazz and progressive elements that have been slowly building up since Human. We're really starting to show on this album, giving it a truly unique flavor. And then you have the swan song album of all time, I think. That would be The Sound of Perseverance, Death's last album before Chuck Schuldiner died in 2001. Rest in peace, bro. This album is fantastic. The most amazing thing is anybody who's ever said that death metal was shit, that the vocals are indecipherable, for the most part, you could agree with them on that, that the lyrics suck, that the writing of the song structures suck, that the riffs suck, and it's just noise, will instantly take back as soon as they hear this album. This album is full of fantastic melodies. They still have some of those very brutal riffs. It's much more progressive. I would call this a technical death metal album or a progressive death metal album. Chuck Schuldiner and Death and Company wrote a fantastic album, just full of beautiful melodies and memorable songs and great lyrical content. A prime example of like a song coming together that beautifully explains kind of the attitude and mood towards Death towards the end of its life cycle, the band's life cycle. It's Voice of the Soul, fantastic instrumental with just that tapped area, tapped clean guitars, fantastic melody, and it's stuck. It's kind of a swan song to like everything they've ever done. Albums to recommend from Death are definitely Symbolic, Sound of Perseverance. For the older stuff, Scream Buddy Gore is fantastic, and Human is as well. Death was a fantastic band. It's a tragedy that Chuck Scollier had to die. He was a great lyricist, great song composer, great guitarist. He's influenced the whole scene throughout, even though more bands started to get more and more brutal than them, even through the 90s, like when Suffocation, Cannibal Corpse, Deicide, Immolation came out. They were still on top. They were still on top. Their game, whereas more childish bands were getting more attention, like Morbid Angel. The reason I'm using childish because I'm not really a Morbid Angel fan. They're getting more attention than I think they should have. Elders Madness, I can't fucking not love the Blister. Say fuck that shit. You know, Chuck Scollier and crew made fantastic albums. They stayed on top of their game, and they just delivered classic after classic in this band's timeline. And they've influenced not only the death metal scene, but the whole metal scene throughout, with just creativity and expanding their horizons and how you could write a song or an album in the metal community. Rest in peace, Chuck. Well, it's the end of this hell. So what's on the occasion for the next few weeks? I'll be getting a new amp soon, so guitar covers will be up with the 7-string right here. And I'll be covering the new Napalm Death album, Utilitarian, tomorrow, along with probably like a classic throwback album that I've enjoyed through my childhood. A new segment called Childhood Favorites. So this is Parabola 675 signing off. Keep it metal, subscribe and comment.